So this is what I've learned about nuclear technology and radiation on the topic of nuclear power plants. I've learned that nuclear power plants generate power through the use of nuclear fission. This is when atoms are split apart, which produces vast amounts of energy in the form of heat. This boils water into steam, which then turns turbines. This is kinetic energy and is harnessable. This form of power is very effective at producing a lot of electricity without many greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, it typically uses the element uranium to produce power. The problem with that is that uranium is highly radioactive. Many people question as to whether or not it is safe to be using nuclear power. From what I've researched, nuclear power plants look like one of the safest forms of power. This seems weird because you think nuclear bombs and radiation, but studies have shown that workers at nuclear power plants don't have any higher risk of cancer than normal public. Radiation levels in nuclear power plants are closely monitored to make sure the workers do not exceed the maximum amount allowed by Environmental Health and Safety Organization. What about the explosion factor? What happens if the power plant explodes like Chernobyl or Fukushima Daiichi? Well, nobody actually died in Fukushima Daiichi. The only reason Fukushima Daiichi is actually a disaster was because the seawall wasn't large enough to stop the tsunami from coming in. At the first sign of the earthquake, the Fukushima Daiichi power plant shut down, so that if something was to break, it wouldn't have disastrous effect. Unfortunately, then the tsunami came and got over the seawall. This flooded some of the power generators that were keeping everything cool. This also effectively prevented anyone from coming in and doing repairs. Eventually, the battery ran out of power to keep the systems cool. This is when the explosions happened, although there were technically not nuclear explosions but chemical ones. As you can see, there are many levels of security set up so that nuclear power plants will not have this kind of problem. As for Chernobyl, that one was because the nuclear power plant was poorly designed and was being run by inadequately trained personnel. This is what led to the nuclear meltdown. However, there were only 31 deaths, which is pretty good, all things included. While nuclear power facilities are expensive to make, they are relatively cheap to run, cheap enough to compete with coal and natural gas. Uranium, the element used to power the nuclear power facilities, has an advantage over coal and natural gas, being way more effective. A kilogram of uranium produces 20,000 times more energy than the same amount of coal. This means that transporting uranium is much easier because we don't have to transport such massive amounts of it. Another bonus is that uranium is quite abundant and easy to get to. Uranium is 500 times more common than gold and 40 times more common than silver. Although much of this is not in large enough concentration to be economically available, there is, however, still plenty of uranium to be found around the world. Australia is one of the highest producing uranium countries. Once uranium is used, it is very hot and radioactive. While this can be dangerous if handled correctly, no problems should arise. First of all, the workers have to be shielded from radiation, as well as the uranium needs to be cooled. The shielding can be done by a dense material like concrete or steel, or by water. Water effectively works as a cooler and a shield. Used uranium is stored in underwater containment for 5 years. After that, it can be moved to dry containment. However, it is usually left in water for about 50 years. It can be left there indefinitely if desired. After it is cooled, it is safer to handle. The uranium can be deposited into underground bunkers. This is however, just for high-level waste. The low and intermediate level radiation waste, which consists of 97% of the waste produced, can be put in the landfill. Also, uranium, after it is used, can be reprocessed and then reused, gaining 30% more energy. Some people worry about terrorism and nuclear power plants. After all, we're putting a nuclear power source in the middle of our country. That does seem a bit questionable. However, from what I've researched, nuclear power plants are heavily secured. They are well defended by a small army with defensive procedures, backup defensive procedures, and defensive procedures for when the backup defensive procedures fail. What happens if they just fly a plane into the power facility? Well, here's a video of a similar situation. I don't think the plane even made a scratch. While nuclear power isn't as green as wind or solar power, it is much more environmentally friendly than coal or natural gas. The majority of nuclear power plant CO2 emissions come from the construction of the power plant, but that comes with any power facility. Once built, the nuclear power plant can run effectively with relatively minimal CO2 emissions. Unlike natural gas and coal, which produce large amounts of CO2 emissions per kilowatt generated. It's not as environmentally friendly as it could be, but it's certainly more environmentally friendly than where most of our power is coming from. Another environmental impact we should look at is the waste. Nuclear power plants produce radioactive waste, which then has to be dealt with. Burying it so far looks like the best option, in a secure underground bunker where the radioactive materials can run themselves out. Eventually, the used uranium becomes safe again, but this takes a long time. How will this affect me or the people in my life? Well, as far as I go, I've been looking into engineering as a career option, and power/electricity has always interested me. So if there's an influx in nuclear power plants being built, this will mean there is engineering jobs in the power department that will be available. Other than that, there is not a huge impact on my life from nuclear power facilities. One of my uncles works for BC Hydro as an electrician, but he doesn't do anything with nuclear power plants. Also, one of my friends is going into aerospace engineering, so he will possibly be working with some kind of nuclear power. I don't know anybody who works in a nuclear facility or does anything related to nuclear power. I don't live near a nuclear power plant, and I don't know anybody who lives near a power plant. So currently, nuclear power facilities aren't making a huge impact on my life.